Hello and welcome to another Truthloader live discussion. Today's guest blogger is Alien Scientist, and he's put together a video which we featured on our page about the science of September the 11th attacks, namely how World Trade Center 7 came down or collapsed. That's why we're having this discussion today. Now, World Trade Center 7 collapsed on September the 11th, 2001. It was a 47-story steel-structured building, and it collapsed 7 hours after the Twin Towers collapsed on September the 11th. Now, the collapse of World Trade Center 7 has been a controversial topic for some time. The 9/11 Commission report, which was published in 2004, failed to mention the collapse of World Trade Center 7 at all in its 450-page report. Now, independent investigators find the World Trade Center 7's absence from the final report particularly conspicuous. And the American public had to wait until 2008 for a final report on how World Trade Center 7 collapsed. That report was published by the National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST, and their theory suggested that World Trade Center 7 collapsed due to fire, which was burning uncontrolled on a number of floors of World Trade Center 7. Independent researchers, namely architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, believe that the fire hypothesis is indeed impossible, and they say they have 1,700 architects and engineers who've all signed a pledge to say that this is so. So here we are in 2013, and this is a debate that still continues. And to discuss this very topic, we have two people with us today. Perhaps later in the conversation, we may have a third person join us. But we have Jeremy Riss, who's from the YouTube blog Alien Scientist. It's also a website. And we have Professor Niels Har. Now, Professor Niels Har is the ex-associate professor of chemistry at the University of Copenhagen. So there you have it. There are two guests. If I could kick-start the question perhaps to you, Jeremy, why do you think the debate around World Trade Center 7 has continued for so long?
Because the science given by the government is completely fraudulent and it's demonstrably false on every single level. Anyone who watches a video does not have a technical background in science. I don't see how they could conclude that this building fell from natural causes when it looks exactly identical to a controlled demolition. I think the debate will never be over until the whole truth is officially released about 9/11, and whether that's through disclosure or through active campaigning and maybe a whole new international criminal court with like a Nuremberg trial type of thing takes these people to court and settles the issue there. I really don't think this issue will ever be over, especially when the science is so unambiguously pointed in the direction of a controlled demolition. And that's just my personal opinion.
If I could ask you, Jeremy, what in particular about the final NIST report, which is available for anybody to, if they want to find this report, they can just Google the final report on the collapse of World Trade Center 7 by NIST and take a look. It's a long report, but what in particular from that report is, as you say, scientifically fraudulent?
Well, I have a video called Why the NIST Report on World Trade Center 7 is Unscientific and False. If you Google that, you can watch my video. I demonstrated about 14 different points in that video, from them removing the shear studs from all the main girders to them having differential thermal expansion on the beams. Yeah, basically they had thermal expansion maximized because they said right in their own report, and this is in their report, and I give the pages and sources for people to reference this and look it up. It's basically they applied only the heat to the steel girders and not the concrete slabs attached, so that would maximize thermal expansion and get the whole building to fall apart really easy. I mean, they have never released their black box computer model. They have never opened it or offered it for peer review or an open source sort of analysis of that. So that in itself is suspicious and unscientific. And I just think that the revelations that they do give us from people who have read those reports in detail, the architects and engineers who have read those reports in details, will show that they are there's numerous things which are very suspicious about the way they conducted their experiments and the way they conducted their modeling, which is basically, yeah.
Just for our viewers at home, or anybody who's watching this live, many people haven't actually ever seen the collapse of World Trade Center 7, and we do have some footage of that, just so it's going to be easy for everybody to at least see the collapse for themselves before we discuss it. So perhaps we could roll that footage if we have it. Now that footage which you just saw took place, as I say, 5:20 p.m. on September 11th, 2001. Professor Niels Har, if I could come to you, you've published a scientific paper which has been read amongst many people within the 9/11 Truth movement. What is it about the final NIST report that you yourself contest?
On Building 7?
Yes.
Okay, well, I can subscribe to every word which has been said up until now, and maybe for many people it is not possible to follow all the details in the scientific discussion. So you can only point to the fact that natural science is based on experience, and there's been many fires in steel frame high-rises so far, hundreds, and each time you observe that the building remains standing, and when you have seen that a sufficient number of times, you reach the conclusion that a steel frame high-rise simply does not collapse due to fire, and that's it. That is experience. So just for NIST to come up and say that, well, this happens for the first time in history, is an uphill, impossible battle for them to fight. So this is very basic. A steel frame high-riser does not collapse due to fire. And then they suggest the collapse model, as we've just heard, which is simply completely ridiculous. They suggest that we see this whole building, which is 186 meters high, 47 stories, should collapse just because one steel beam drops under the 13th floor in the northeast corner. It is ridiculous.
Column 79.
Pardon?
Column 79.
Yeah, no, it's the girder connecting 79 with 44 in the perimeter falling down, and that should trigger a completely symmetrical free fall collapse. And maybe we should say a few words on what free fall implies. It means that the 47th floor, when it comes down, it falls as if there is absolutely nothing supporting it. And going into free fall means that all the potential energy of that object or this floor goes into accelerating the floor. There's absolutely zero energy left for breaking the thousands of steel beams and girders and columns. And this is fundamental basic physics. We're talking about Sir Isaac Newton physics here. There is absolutely no way around this observation. And the funny thing is, the NIST admits...
Sorry, go ahead.
Please.
Yeah. I'd like to ask, you mentioned about the free fall of the building. If fire did not cause the collapse, as many people inside, architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth have said, what is the theory for how the building did come down, if indeed fire did not cause that?
I'd say, well, Danny Juenko, the demolitions expert from Holland, was shown a video of World Trade Center 7, and he said that's without a doubt controlled demolition. You watch the video that you just played. There's a classic crimp down the center of the building, so that gets the building to fall in on itself rather than outward, and where it could potentially damage nearby neighboring buildings. And the building comes straight down in a very symmetric, very organized fashion, and you can't get that sort of precision and that timing without pre-planted devices which sever those beams in an exact timed demolition. There's no other way to achieve that perfect and symmetric level of destruction. I don't see how it could be possible. As Niels Har said, Newton's laws. This is 300-year-old physics. The free fall is not an issue of speed. It's an acceleration. It's the issue of acceleration and how fast this building accelerates downward.
So we saw the fires there, Niels Har, in the footage that we just saw. That there were some of the fires which were in this report, which they've said caused the total collapse of this building. Is it not at all possible that a fire fueled by office furniture, air draft through the building, and a hydrocarbon fire is hot enough to cause the collapse of this building?
Absolutely not. As I just told you, there's been many fires in buildings of this type, and each time you make the observation that the building does not collapse On top of that, actually, British Steel, which is not called British Steel anymore, carried out a series of 7 experiments from 1993 to 2001 on the Carrington test site, where they had full-scale steel structures, 8 stories, and they burned them under completely controlled conditions, meaning that they were monitoring the temperatures within the steel girders, and the structure did not collapse. And we are talking about temperatures actually far beyond what you can obtain in an office fire. There is no way a steel frame can collapse due to fires. And it was not a raging inferno. There were random fires, small random fires in the building. Under common circumstances, the firemen would just come up and extinguish it. And that's what they do, and they drive home. And
I'd like to go to an experiment actually by a man called Jonathan Cole. He's a civil engineer. In fact, we spoke to Jeremy Riss earlier, alien scientist, who said he's actually a family friend, so an interesting and strange connection there. Jonathan Cole is part of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, and he was inspired by a documentary he saw by National Geographic which claimed that thermite could not be used to cut through steel. Now, thermite is what Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth claim was used to bring down the buildings. Jonathan Cole disputed that fact and did his own experiment. So perhaps we could take a look at a short clip from that experiment.
Using an ordinary steel box tube, I had a slot milled along one edge. Welding the bottom and using clamps on the top to hold the powdered thermite in, I bolted it to a steel beam vertically. I called this device my thermitic box cutter. With only 1.5 pounds of thermite, or less than 1/100th of what the National Geographic experts used for their experiment. Not only was I able to melt steel, but it also sliced a vertical cut. So I made a slightly larger thermitic box cutter and used 2 3/8 bolts drilled and tapped on one side of the connection. It only took a slight twist to break it completely off.
Professor, maybe we could get your take on this. This kind of work we see come up quite often. It's often quoted by the Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. Is any of this work within the field of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth ever peer-reviewed?
Jonathan Cole, is that what you're asking about?
Well, let's start with Jonathan Cole and some other work within the movement, yes.
Well, he's doing experiments in his backyard, in his garden. And this is wonderful. It's beautiful. He's a great engineer, and he's acting. But maybe it will be more relevant to point to the fact that this thermite, or thermate, if you wish, has been applied in torpedoes and grenades since at least between the 2 world wars. This is a common ingredient in incendiary in the devices which are used to go through armor. So this is what you have in a torpedo. And I can show you actually commercial devices you can buy on the internet, which goes right through steel beams. So this is not groundbreaking by any means. This is old technology. It goes back to 1893.
Well, also there's that 1935 issue of Popular Mechanics where they show the Skyride Tower in Chicago that they demolished it using thermite to melt the steel legs of the structure, and then, you know, all these years later, now Popular Mechanics claims that same thing, which was demonstrated in an earlier version of their magazine, can't be done. It's just kind of ridiculous. The thermite has multiple applications in demolitions, from, as Niels mentioned, anti-tank weapons to demolition agents. The CIA trains people in the use of thermite demolition devices. It's called the Burn and Blow Boys. I've read it in books, and Philip Adgie's book. So it's there. It's all over the place. It's nothing new.
So how would if this theory has any credibility, how would the people have got these box cutters inside of the building? Wouldn't they have been noticed surely by the people inside of the building?
Well, the security companies of the World Trade Center are an obvious. The first thing you should ask yourself is who had access to these buildings, and I think one person has done more research into that than anyone I've seen is Kevin Ryan. He has an article called "Who Had Demolition Access to the World Trade Center Buildings," and he just goes over all the potential candidates that could have had access to those. And there's some very suspicious people that come up. I won't name any names here, but it's certainly an interesting alternative hypothesis to take a second look at for anyone out there who's willing to entertain this idea further.
Coming back to the NIST report, if I could ask you, Professor, your work you claim has been peer-reviewed. The paper you put out about the dust that was found on September 11th. Has the work of the National Institute the National Institute of Standards and Technology ever been peer-reviewed?
Well, the most catastrophic aspect of the NIST report on the Twin Towers is that it does not cover the collapse. That's completely ridiculous. If you come to chapter 6, it is called the probable collapse sequence, and you start reading and you're expecting to get an account of the collapse, but very fast you realize that they do not cover the collapse. And then you go to the bottom of page 82, footnote number 13, where they actually admit that they do not cover the collapse. It is 14,000 pages, and the report does not cover the collapse itself. This is outrageous. People believe that there is a technical account for the collapse of the Twin Towers. No, there is not.
Well, they also have never published their modeling data, so it's never been peer-reviewed because it's not open to the public for peer review.
So you guys are campaigning on this issue in your own ways. Jeremy Riss, you have your own YouTube blog. Professor Niels Har, you've published scientific literature on this topic. What are you going to do next? What's the next step for you guys on this issue? This happened in 2001, it's 2013. Why is this still being debated, do you think?
Well, should I?
Yes, please continue.
Well, I consider myself a part of what you call the truth movement, and this means there are millions of people all over the world. Everyone is acting out from an inner urge and doing whatever they can do from the point in time and space they are. And this is what I'm doing. I'm doing a lot of presentations because the mainstream media so far have not covered this event. If you go into the street and ask for Building 7, most people have never seen Building 7. And this speaks volumes, actually. They do not want us to see it. And so this is what I'm doing, what I can. I'm a scientist. It's payback time. So I'm just providing my expertise in the public domain in the ways I can.
And Jeremy, what about yourself?
Well, I have a bachelor's in physics, and my sort of role is to mediate between people like Niels Har, who have this really immense technical understanding that is not easy for the layman to really comprehend. And my sort of role is taking that information and putting it into videos, because most people do not read. They will watch a video, and videos will get 250 million views on YouTube. Well, I could publish the same thing in an article and maybe get 3 people to read it. So my job is to make sure that this information is getting out to a mainstream audience and to get this information out to a large number of people. That's pretty much my role in this whole thing. I don't think that I can do much more than what I am doing in my own capacities, but I do my part to just basically get this information out there and explain it to people and break it down, and also give them the links for if they do want to review the more technical stuff, they can go and get access to that.
Thank you, both of you guys, for joining us today. It's been a really interesting discussion. I'd be interested to hear from our subscribers if you'd ever heard of World Trade Center 7 before today, so do let us know your thoughts about that in a comment. If this is a story that interests you, we're doing another piece about a very strange court case which took place yesterday in Horsham. We did a very short piece about that yesterday. We're going to be doing another piece about that on Friday, a slightly longer piece. So do hit subscribe if this is the first time you've seen us and you want to see that piece. It will be available on Friday. Thanks again to Jeremy Riss. His video from Alien Scientist is viewable on our page. You can see it in the featured section. And thank you very much, Niels Har, and thank you to everybody who watched. I'm sorry I didn't get to read out comments. It was a very amateur mistake on my part, but the battery on my laptop died midway through the debate. So if you left any comments, I am very sorry. But thanks for joining us. It's been a great debate, and we'll see you again next time.
All right, thanks. Hey, Dr. Har, nice meeting you, man. I'm a big fan of your work.
You're doing a good job also. Very good. You hear me still? No. We're